This is Radical Love Live, an ongoing series of podcasts and special events where we explore faith outside the boxes. Hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. Hey, Radical Love Live listeners, it's Mark. How you doing? Welcome to another episode. And Kelly will be joining us shortly, so I'm going to start up here by myself, provided I don't get myself into too much trouble. I'll try not to. So with that said, we have an awesome guest with us today, and that is Colby Martin. Hey, Colby.
Hey, am I the awesome guest, or are we waiting for him to log on?
No, you are the awesome guest, my friend. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
So when you run it solo, because Kelly is doing whatever Kelly's doing, do you get a higher cut of the revenue at the end of the month? Like, you get like 60% right now? It's great.
Well, it's a little bit more than that, but hopefully he won't ever hear this part.
Okay. All right.
Nah, we're partners in crime. If anything else, Colby, just as a backstory, even for the listeners here, when we created this back in late 2019 and started our first season in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, Kelly and I have been collaborators, co-creators, co-hosts, and everything else. So, he is as much a part of this as all of us, and it's great. It's fun to do this by myself with you, but he's with us in spirit. That's for sure.
I love it.
Yeah, indeed. So, Colby, again, it's great to have you on. You have a wealth of experience and wisdom that you're bringing into the conversation here, but I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about your spiritual journey, starting out as a kid, and kind of fill in the framework for our listeners about what you've been up to.
Sure. Should I just start when I was 5 years old? How's that sound? Yeah, I think I was 5. I might have been 6. I don't know. One of the things about childhood trauma is you just don't remember things very well. So I've got very few memories prior to the age of like 8 or 9. No, we're good. Yeah, it's real.
It's real. Thank you for sharing that right there. Sorry, folks, but I don't remember a lot of my childhood because of trauma.
Yeah.
I
was just being awesome. And I would love to know what distinguishes between awesome and freaking awesome. Tell me what that gap is.
I will answer that for you, my friend. Awesome is when I don't feel pure joy, like there's a little dip in, those dark moments that I have these days.
Okay.
But freaking awesome is when I'm on top of, and I just feel the joy and the oneness of everything that goes on in my life, and it's just like I'm zinging along. That's freaking awesome.
I love not only that you had an answer for that, but I love what your answer is. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. All right, Colby. So the question that you were replying to was when I asked you to pause for a second, is you had mentioned that you have no recollection of your childhood, and you were just about to start sharing a little bit more about that, actually.
Yeah. So where I was going was I was going to tell you the story of when I asked God into my heart as a good Baptist child did, and I might have been 5, might have been 6. Doesn't really matter. The point is I was a small child who grew up in a strong Baptist environment. My dad comes from a long line of Baptists and Mennonites. My mom was actually a first generation Christian. She came to the church in high school as a respite from her family situation, and that's where her and my dad met. And so, I grew up going to church multiple times a week. It was just part of the life and the rhythm. And I grew up in Oregon, by the way. And so at some point along the way, I picked up the message that the thing to do as a human is to invite Jesus into your heart, to confess that you were a sinner, and to state that you believe that Jesus died for your sins and that you invite him into your heart. And then I guess at that point, the algorithm clicks in and your name's written in the book of life, and you get certainty of heaven when you die as opposed to hell, which what 5-year-old wouldn't want to do that? I mean, not only do you get to avoid burning forever, which sounds like something any 5-year-old would opt to not experience, but you also get the satisfaction of making your parents happy, right? Because they feel like, oh yeah, we've done our parental duty to get our child saved. But then you can even scale that up. You make your religious community happy, like the celebration that happens when people, become a Christian or become born again, I guess is the language that would have been popular at that time. And so I remember that happening. And again, I said this a minute ago, but my memory on this is, as I'm sure, pieced together from various stories, and I don't know how super reliable it is, but it doesn't matter. It's my memory of the narrative, and my memory was I was on the top bunk of the bunk bed, and my dad had just tucked me in, and as he walked down the hallway, I sort of hollered after him, and he came back in, and I'm sure he was just thinking I needed another drink of water, or was delaying bedtime, or like adjust the fan, because we always slept with fans on in our house, and to this day I kind of need fans and white noise to fall asleep. But no, I asked him, or I said, Dad, I'm ready to invite Jesus into my heart. And so he led me through the what the Baptist world called the sinner's prayer, which, just think about that for a minute. Think about what we're asking our young kids to do in those situations. We're asking them to take for themselves an identity of being a fallen sinner, which, if you want to talk about original sin and you want to get into that, that's fine. I would love to discuss that with you, but just for a moment, set aside the truthiness of that doctrinal statement and just think about what we're asking small children to do, to take upon themselves this concept that I am so bad, that there's so much wrong with me, that the God who created everything literally cannot stand me, can't even be in the same room with me, metaphorically, and then when I die, literally, as the story goes, can't even be anywhere close to me because I'm so bad, I'm so broken. We're asking small children to take that upon, like, think that the psychological damage is, we're seeing the effects of that over and over and over and over again. It's a heavy thing to ask our children. It's a heavy thing to ask adults to take on themselves, but to put that upon children is just, and then the way that the brain sort of receives that as a kid, you activate then all the dopamine hits, and you get all excited because you have just stamped your ticket to heaven. And like I said a minute ago, you made your family happy, you made your church happy. So the trade-off of like feeling good about feeling bad, that's kind of weird. feel bad enough as a sinner so that then you can feel good as being saved.
Wow. So Colby, you were how old? 5?
5 or 6, I would imagine, is about the time.
So that's pretty amazing as a kindergartner, first grader, that you are somewhere in your mind, you had heard and experienced enough that you knew that you wanted to bring Jesus into your heart, and then that process was going to take place. That's what happened to me, in a not so directly in your story and telling, but I'm the I am the effect of learning that I was broken and defective in God's eyes because I wasn't baptized and because I was already starting to figure out that I was gay. So I was a few years older, but it's, to your point, that's a very traumatizing experience, on how that happens. So, all right. So you bring Jesus into your heart,
Yeah.
and you proceed forward. So I take it you stayed with the Baptist faith growing up?
Yeah, stayed with the Baptist faith. Fast forward 5 years or so, my parents got a divorce finally after a messy couple years of separation and more trauma. And my mom attempted to keep my 2 brothers and I in the Baptist world at the church we were going to, but Baptist, and this is especially true back in the 90s, they didn't know what to do with divorced people. Like, divorce was at that time probably more heinous of a sin than even homosexuality, just because there wasn't a cultural conversation like we have today. So like divorce was the worst. So the fact that my mom was a now divorcee with kids, and I'm sure the church did as good as they can, but my mom ultimately didn't feel like we belonged there anymore. And so we found a different generic evangelical church to go to. And that was where I continued to go through high school. But for me, at that point, going to church was just kind of a thing that we did. I wasn't super tuned into it. But then my senior year of high school, the summer going into that, is really when I had, at that time, what I would have called a profound calling from God to give my life to ministry, right? That's how I would have framed it back then. And even today, I don't even know how to talk about it today. I just know that at that time, that was what it felt like. I was at a trip down in Southern California with my youth group. They were training high schoolers how to do street witnessing. So they'd send us out into Huntington Beach 2x2 because that's biblical, right? And we would just strike up conversations with strangers and figure out how to Jesus juke the conversation to basically ask them, if you were to die right now, do you know where you would go? Like, just casual things that you ask people at Starbucks, and then figure out how to use all of our apologetics training to convince them that they too are a sinner and are destined for hell. But good news, if you just say this prayer with me, then you'll be saved. And I remember coming back, Mark, from that first day of doing that. When I was 17 years old, and I get back to the room I was staying at, and I just fell on my bed and just started weeping, which was not something I was accustomed to. Like now, as a 41-year-old man, post psychedelic therapy, post divorce, I cry a lot and I'm fine with it and I love it. But prior to that, I didn't cry much, and we could probably attribute that to some of the aforementioned childhood trauma, where the emotions were like, "Nope, we're not going to feel." No, but I'm just on my bed, just weeping, and in that moment, I felt as though God was inviting me to one of two paths. I could either stay on the path that I was on, which was Christian in name only, which was fine, but it was just kind of, life was like any teenager. Life was all about me, and what I felt was, I felt a super disconnect. I felt like a fraud when I was out on the beach talking to people about Jesus. I was telling people about a thing that I really didn't have an experience for myself. Didn't really have a relationship with God in that way. I just knew the answers to say. And so I'm feeling like a fraud, crying on my bed, feeling God saying, "Hey bud, you can keep doing what you're doing. It's fine." Like, well, I probably at that time I wouldn't have thought God said it was fine, or the other path, God's like, or this can be a turning point in your life, and you can start to live, fully and wholly for me and for the kingdom, whatever. I don't know what words I would have used back then. And that was the path I chose. I'm like, all right, this is it. I am throwing all my chips on this table. And that week is one of the nights during the large gatherings, is when I felt this strong calling to go into ministry, which I've reflected about in the years past. And I think a lot of that was sort of just cultural conditioning, because when you were someone in my position who had a particular charm, a particular social standing, a certain kind of intellectual, like, it just seems like, well, that's what you do, is you become a pastor. Right. At the time I felt it was a calling, but looking back, it was more like, no, this was just the natural next step for someone I'm a straight white male who can talk to people. So that's what you do, is you become a pastor. So now I kind of demystify it a little bit with some more just psychological, like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. But at the time I felt, no, God is inviting me. God's calling me to be a pastor. So I changed my plans to be a graphic designer in college. Enrolled into a Christian college, got my degree in pastoral ministry, and away I went. I was ready to win at being an evangelical pastor. I couldn't wait.
Wow. So how many years did you do this?
How many years did
were you a pastor in a traditional sense, the evangelical?
Oh yeah, it didn't last long.
Okay.
Here's the thing about college and post-college life. Once you hit the real world,
yeah,
a lot of those evangelical sensibilities, they don't map on very well to reality. They don't. You start to realize pretty quickly that the world is actually not black and white, that the sort of the dualistic right, wrong, in, out, us, them, that framework is not tenable in this world. It's not.
It's not, but the majority of people live in that. And you learned this in college early on?
No, I learned it shortly after college, when I started reading books that would not have been approved by my Baptist professors.
Exactly, because I'm not a Southern Baptist or Baptist myself, but it's kind of binary, right?
Oh yeah,
it's exactly those words that you just used. It's good or bad, right or wrong, left, right. Those kinds of things. Like there's not a lot of room for gray and subjectivity. It's like no, we live in objectivity. You're either saved or you're not.
Yeah, and the charitable part of me says, and it totally makes sense. It totally makes sense that is their worldview. And here's the reason why. If you're, not you personally, but if an individual's primary assumption is that the God of the universe, the most important thing to God, and somewhere along the way, a lot of Christianity started to think this way, that the most important thing to God is what humans believe. Think about that for a minute. We we have we have developed a religion around the idea that the God who created everything cares most about what Homo sapiens, or the ideas that we have in our brain. And so when that's your fundamental starting point, is that the thing God cares about most is what you believe, what you think, then you, before I say my next sentence, what's the show's policy on swearing? Keep it clean.
I keep it relatively clean. Like if there's one or two
No.
words, we're good. But
no, that's fine. So if you think that God cares most about what you think, then you darn well better figure out what the right answer is and then lock that sucker down. That is the move. Of course it is. Of course it is. If you think that God cares most about what we believe, figure out what the right answer is, lock it down, and don't change it. Now, of course, I have all kinds of issues with this idea that God cares most about what people think. I mean, think of all the variables that make that utterly improbable and impractical. Depending upon what time in history you were born, what part of the world you were born, what sort of mental abilities or lack thereof, or hindrances that you might have to even to think that God cares. Like I'm a parent. I've been a parent for 19 years. I got 4 kids. Never once, Mark, have I ever thought to myself, you know what's most important to me about being a father to these kids is it matters most to me that they know exactly everything there is to know about me and they get it right. Like they need to know what my job is. They need to know what my fundamental characteristics are. That's what's no, it's not. That is so far down the list on the things that I care about as a parent. So I can sympathize with to go back to the binary world of a lot of Christians, specifically evangelical Christians. I can sympathize with this, get the right answers. It's all about belief and lock it down. Because if you think your standing with the divine is dependent upon ideas in your head, then yeah, that is going to be the world that you live in. And it's going to be really hard to shake you from that, because any toying around or messing around with beliefs now in your worldview puts you at risk of being on the outside of God's goodwill. And that's terrifying.
That is terrifying. And you bring up a good point. And God, I just love you sharing your story. And so first thing is, I think we are soulmates at some level, because the things you just shared is the stuff that I write about, which, fits into what my worldview is, that we're all living a shared experience and we're all connected in oneness. So I'm not shocked that you said, but it's great to hear that, because those are the same things I think. And like, okay, great. At least I know there's one other person on this planet in this reality that thinks the way I do. But God love you for sharing that. You are absolutely right, though, about the terrifying elements of that, because, even as adults, regardless of when somebody is introduced to this and then they embrace this, like you're making a decision about your self-worth based on what somebody else believes that our creator, our source, whatever you want to call it, has deemed that we need to fit into that narrative. And if we don't, then we're automatically like defective, and there's all these horrible things that are going to happen. And hello, Kelly.
Hi there. I just showed up out of nowhere.
You did.
You got a Kelly. This is fantastic.
Yeah. This is magic.
I'm no longer in the car.
So, folks, Kelly is with us live and in person in studio. So
that's right. The devil was trying to keep me from getting here with that traffic on the Garden State Parkway, but
not today, Satan. Not today.
Right. Jesus made a way where there was no way.
To be honest, if that was the devil's attempt at keeping you, I just feel like that was pretty weak.
I got it. Yeah.
That's the best you could do, Satan.
like a sinkhole. I could think of a sinkhole could be really helpful. I don't know if you have tornadoes out in that part of the world.
Chunks of asphalt.
Yeah.
Hurricanes.
That Dunkin' Donuts coffee that you drink maybe could have like really jacked with your internal system and caused you to like need to, pull off on the side. I just think there's so many other ways.
I'd be calling from the rest stop. Yeah.
So that was weak, Satan. That was weak. Yeah. No offense.
Yeah. Next time, weak. Satan. Do better, Satan.
Anyway, I have been listening to the conversation while I was on my way, and there's a lot of parallels. I grew up in the Church of the Nazarene in South Bend, Indiana, and had a very similar sort of, like the Romans Road, like everyone has sinned, everyone is on, on there. Do you know the Romans Road?
I do, because of you, my dear friend.
Those certain, catchphrases through Romans that you can pick
The
out.
wages of sin is death. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
That's right. No one's righteous, not one.
I'm not laughing because I'm not like, if there's anybody that listens to this episode is like, oh my God, he just laughed at a biblical passage. No, I did not laugh at it that way, but it's in keeping with the conversation here. It is amazing though, that which we're going to talk about in this conversation, how we will extract out all those points that make us a worldview fit a particular narrative to fit, whatever the underlying reason is, power, patriarchy, both, some more, maybe money, whatever the case may be. But so, all right. So let's go back to you started reading non-Baptist kind of books and got yourself into trouble. You started to realize there's non-binary in this world. Pick it up from there. What else was going on with you?
So what those books did early on, shortly after college, was they gave me permission. A couple things. They gave me permission to ask questions of the faith, which, again, to go back to what we were saying a minute ago, if your fundamental starting point is to believe the right things and then lock it down, questions become a kind of threat. And churches now would say, well, we're not afraid of questions. Okay, you're kind of telling the truth. You're not afraid of questions as long as they lead to the answers that they've always led to, really, is what it is.
Right. And there's some very pat answers that you'll find to questions of theodicy and other things. It's like, well, people have to learn from their suffering, or these little like Hallmark card captions.
Yeah, for sure. So I got permission to ask questions, and my eyes widened to the reality that the Christian faith from the beginning has been this wide, diverse collection of ways to express and practice Christianity, which in the Baptist world, there wasn't really room for. There was kind of this unspoken assumption that there's an unbroken chain from like Jesus to Peter to Paul to the Baptists. Like, it was just everything else is some sort of like failure to abide by the truth, and the Baptists have
Calvin picked it up somewhere, and
but it turns out, like, there's all from the beginning. I mean, there's all. Bart Ehrman talks about it as the many Christianities, like in the first couple centuries. But even beyond that, you've got the Orthodox Church, you've got Catholicism, which in my Baptist world, one of my Baptist classes was world religions and cults. And Catholicism like fit as a cult in that frame view. Like, this is how just bonkers it is. The church that was the Christian church for 1,500 years, they weren't the Catholic Church. They were just the church, because that's all.
That's the only show in town.
Yeah, the only show in town, right?
Only show in town. So my mind it expanded to the reality that the church has always been diverse and has always asked questions and gotten slightly different answers. And that's not something to be afraid. That's something to be embraced, really, in my opinion. And that slowly led me to an audit of a lot of my evangelical assumptions about what was true within the context of Christianity. And that happened, again, probably a year and a half or two out of college. And then I moved to Arizona and got a job at a large evangelical church there. And over the course of my 5-year tenure there was really when a lot of people use the term deconstruction now. That wasn't a term back then. And it's not even one that I really use for myself. But when I say that, I think people understand what I mean, the shorthand for that. But really, it was about auditing all these different beliefs. And I think of it as a Jenga tower, and each block I'm like pulling out of the middle of it. Maybe this is the doctrine of eternal conscious torment, of hell. And I'm exploring it. I'm asking questions of it. The Jewish tradition talks about reading scripture and turning it like a gem in your hand and seeing all the ways that the light reflects off it and getting a bunch of different perspectives. And so I'm doing this with all these different, the inerrancy of scripture, the historical Jesus, what is the kingdom of God? And I'm auditing all these beliefs. And just like Jenga, sometimes you end up holding on to the piece. You just turn it a little bit differently. You add it to your tower. You're like, I'm going to keep this one, but it's different than it was before. Like, it's more informed now. And I'm holding it less tightly, because good gravy. I mean, when your assumption is that you have to believe the right things and hold it with certainty, you hold those suckers tightly. But when you can relax and realize, what if the thing that's most important to God is not the ideas in our head? Now you can hold these more loosely. Like, you're not as anxious about the fact that you might be, quote, wrong, or it might not be a belief you want to hold anymore. And so some of the beliefs I would hold on to, but differently. And then some of the beliefs I would just throw away. Like, you know what? This is not serving me anymore. This does not feel consistent with who I believe Jesus was and what the mission of his ministry was. And then others I would maybe just sort of set over on the shelf and be like, I don't know what to do with this one. I'm not going to throw it away yet, but I also can't really hold on to it in good conscience. So I'm just going to set it over here. Maybe one day I'll come back to that. And that was for the next 4 years as I was at this church in Arizona. And I was doing it all, by the way, under the radar. These were not public conversations that I was having with people. This was private study, because, again, like we said a minute ago, churches of that variety were not safe places to explore and ask questions and to land different ideas, which would ultimately come to a head in 2011 when I got fired. But I assume we'll get to that part of the story here in a minute. I'll pause, because if you guys don't stop me, I'm a preacher at heart. I will just I will just monologue 15 minutes at a time and forget that you guys are even here.
No, it's all good, Colby. What do you got, Kelly?
One of the things you were just saying about belief was something, just this last weekend, I was in a very Baptist heavy environment with this family Thanksgiving that actually.
Okay. I was like, you chose to be there. Okay. Yeah.
In a Baptist church. Like our family's so big that we actually, took over the fellowship hall of the church on a Saturday too. There was also baptism, which was actually
a baptism in a Baptist church. How fitting that they'd all go there.
But that's a different story. But
did you have fruit punch afterwards?
I think we had Diet Cokes.
Diet Cokes.
Pretty salty. The next day I went to Sunday school and church there before I headed back. And one of the things that came up in the Sunday school class was grace versus works, the whole idea of, salvation by grace. And the end point was, you just have to believe and then you're saved by grace. And my question is, if you're the one doing the believing, is that works? Like, does that actually put the work of grace back in your own?
That's still an effort. It's still doing a thing.
Yeah. And if you don't do it, then you haven't done the act that you needed to do to accept grace. So I know it's kind of a semantic thing, but it was just something
not at all.
That really got me
I don't
thinking.
think it is. I agree. Go ahead, Colby.
I was just going to say the Baptist and anyone who's sort of on that side of the 5-point tulip of Calvinism, they don't push the grace envelope far enough. They take it all the way up to that. Like they will lean on grace as this beautiful, important thing, but they just don't push it far enough. Like, because really grace is, no, you don't have to do anything. You literally don't have to do anything. That's what grace is. Nothing. To your point, to expect that someone still has to have a confession of faith or still has to mentally acquiesce to some sort of doctrinal statement is, you're still saying you got to do a thing. You got to do a thing to earn grace. Once you put earn in front of grace, you have eliminated the concept of grace altogether.
Amen, brother. I will say that. Again, that's because that's what happened to me. I specifically say it was prevenient grace because I didn't ask for it, had no idea, and boom, it dropped on me and put me on the path that I'm on now. It's as simple as that.
I love that.
Yeah, prevenient grace. Yeah. So one of my spiritual directors, awesome, he's a great theologian. He introduced me to that concept that the point is that the source is working in us all along because we are all in that. It's not, there never is an other. I simply wasn't aware. And then when the moment that it presented itself, I became conscious of it through, like, there it is, man. And of course I was like, oh, wow. Wow. How did that happen? Now years on, I've thought about it. It's like, no, it was going on all along. And no, I didn't ask for it. Boom, there it was. So,
yeah.
Can
I say one more thing about that? Okay. Although I envisioned a scenario where you're like, no, I'd rather you not say anything more about that. Let's move on. That would have been funny. Okay. Save that for next time. No, we've heard enough. Marvin, can you cut the feed? We've heard enough. Okay, so one of my favorite takeaways, and this struck me a couple years ago when I was preparing a sermon and using what we call the prodigal son story, right? Luke chapter 15. Don't know that that's the best name for it. I think a lot of the subtitles in our Bibles need to be refreshed and updated. But anyway, that's a different story. So the prodigal son, if you recall, you've got a dad who's got two sons, and the younger one says, "I want my inheritance." I was basically saying, "Dad, I kind of wish you were dead right now so that I could have my share of the family estate." And then he goes off and sort of squanders it all, and eventually runs out of money. And then, fun fact: the text actually has this way of saying that the son came back to himself, like he returned, you might say, to an awareness of who he truly was, as kind of another way to, like a more esoteric way to say it. But when he came to himself, he realized, wow, I would be better off like as a servant in my dad's house, because at least then my belly would be full, right? And so he has this whole plan, the story, has this whole plan to come back and grovel at his dad's feet. He's got this whole speech prepared of how he's wronged his dad, and he's repentant and begs to be taken back into the family. And of course, as you know, the father sees the son from a long way off, runs to him, throws his arms around him, kisses him, interrupts the whole speech. Like, I don't care what you have to say. You're home. That's amazing. You're here. Finally, you have understood where home is for you, and this is where you belong. Come, let's have a party. And they throw a party for him. And then, as you know, the older son doesn't show up to the party. He's bitter. He's resentful. He's frustrated that he was the one who did everything right. He did everything right. He didn't squander his inheritance. He didn't run off and neglect family responsibilities. No, he stayed home and he did everything right. And yet his younger brother is being celebrated like this. And so the father comes and looks for him and like, wow, aren't you at the party? And then you get a glimpse of the older son's heart where he's frustrated. He's like, Dad, I've done everything right. And I feel like you've never even given me so much as a goat to have a party with my friends. And the dad, which I think there's a fascinating study here. Dad, where's my goat? The dad, I like to think, and I try to be careful to not over extrapolate these stories of Jesus, because most of the time he was trying to make a pretty simple point. But I like to think you could imagine the dad in that moment, his heart sinking a bit, realizing that maybe he had failed his son in this moment, because he had to then say to his son, Bud, everything I have has always been yours. And you can almost hear in that, like, part of how have you not understood that? But I think the dad also has a responsibility to be like, maybe I didn't show you that well enough. Like, you don't have to ask. Everything I have is always yours. Anyway, so he says this, everything I have has always been yours. And the point I'm making here, and this goes back to the idea of grace, is what I realized is that both of these sons have connected the idea of deserving with their father's love. The younger son thought he didn't deserve his father's love. The older son thought he did deserve his father's love. And what both of them had to realize is that when it comes to love, deserving has nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. And this goes back to the point of grace, where, like, if you think you've got to do something to earn it, if you think you're so wretched that you don't deserve God's love, or if you think you've done everything right and of course God loves me, again, you are missing the point of grace altogether. Like, the love of God is always yours all the time. You can't screw it up. You can't run away from it. You can't get more of it. It's always there, not because you deserve it, but just because you are a beloved child of God, simply by the fact that you are alive. That's some good news right there.
Amen.
It is good news. It does always bring the question of, like, it always goes to, like, well, what about the most evil person in the world? Are they loved? And there's, I've heard entire sermons about that, about how that person may go through some kind of penitential fire to be able to be worthy of love. And, I don't know. I don't know what the answers are, but I know that
we've seen enough superhero movies now at this point, Kelly, to know how villains become villains. Like, Hollywood has pulled back the curtain to show us the origin stories of these. Like, people don't just get born villains. It just doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't.
It happens.
Yeah, it's all psychology. It's so much it's parents, like bad parenting. Or
yeah.
bad economics, or
this is not to excuse the harm and suffering that individuals can cause to one another, but certainly we can find in our hearts compassion for, man, if I was them, I would be them.
Well, that's what you get in undergrad. I studied theater, and one of the things that I learned was when you play a villain never sees themselves as a villain. The villain is the hero of their own story. They just happen to be pursuing different goals than everyone else. They may have a different value system or framework, but they are the hero of their story.
That's correct. Wow.
Yeah.
I love our conversation so far. This is great. Wow. So I have to ask you, you are a het cis male, father of four. Where did the queer component come in and start thinking about, the, as you said, auditing your beliefs and specifically the passages that are used to clobber queer folks? How did that happen?
Yeah, great question. So I mentioned a moment ago when I was using the metaphor of the Jenga tower that some of these pieces, I'd pull out and I would not know what to do with them right away, and I'd kind of set them over on the side, like I'm gonna have to revisit you at some point. And that happened for me with the topic of sexuality and same-sex relationships and all that. Shortly after college, when I was in the process of being licensed to become a minister in the denomination, which at that time I was working for a church in the Christian Missionary Alliance denomination. And so I had to go through a process of, answering questions and essays and eventually an interview to be stamped by the denomination that, yes, you are.
How's that thought? Hey, Barry.
Hold for a second.
Hey, how are you guys?
I'm great. So Barry, this is Colby. Colby, this is Barry.
Hey, Barry.
So I was thinking Barry will probably be popping on anytime. So Barry Taylor is an awesome old friend of Kelly and mine from way back when with Hatchery there in sunny California. And then, oh my God, with Maria. And then Barry is now in lovely Dublin and is joining us for what's going to be another interview. And I thought, well, if this is going to be a crazy mashup, do we just keep the episode going and we'll just like, let it just to be like the four of us?
That's okay. I actually crashed it myself.
Yeah, everybody's crashing the show. So
this is definitely it's like a Moliere play where like people just keep popping in and out.
No, so Barry, you were right on time because you were supposed to be, get in on a couple of minutes early to make sure you got dialed in. So we were just talking with Colby.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
I love it. Oh my God, this is great. So
yeah, I don't.
Oh, you were in London. Thank you for clarifying. What? Oh, you know where I got the Dublin thing? Is because of your work with the university. So it's good to see you, my friend. I look forward to our conversation and catching up with you. So.
All right. Thank you, Barry.
All right. So where were we? Oh, you were talking about, yes, Colby, you were talking about the Jenga, the one about queer folk.
Yeah, that queer block. All right. So I pull out, so I'm auditing. So when they got triggered or kicked off for me was when I was studying to get licensed in the CMA, and I'm reading one afternoon in my lunch break. I'm walking through the church lobby and I'm reading the policies and procedures manual for how they function as a denomination. And I remember reading this section, this sentence that said something to the effect of practicing homosexuals cannot be members of the church. And my first question was, well, what if they're not practicing anymore? What if they're like really good at it?
Yeah, professional homosexuals are always
they're not amateurs, they're professionals.
But I'm sure that's not what they meant. So my second question was, and keep in mind at the time, my theology was pretty well rooted in evangelical Christianity. So I had the right answers, but my mind was like, okay, I get it. Gay people are sinners and that's not God's best, but we're saying they can't be members of a church. Like there's something in that in my heart and my gut space didn't sit right with me. And then I kept reading, and there was all these limitations on like where they couldn't serve, and you know, you can do this, but you can't do that. You know, this sort of second class citizen. You can stand at the door and greet like you're working at Walmart, but do not think you'll ever get to work with our children, sort of thing. And that was for me this first moment of recognizing this massive tension between my head and my heart. My head was rooted in a theological idea, but my heart suddenly couldn't accept that this was the outcome, like that this is how we have to treat people as a result of it. I didn't do much with that tension at the moment. Like I said, I just kind of set that block aside. I'm like, okay, there's that one day I'm gonna have to come back to that because that doesn't sit right with me. And I got licensed through the denomination kind of by the skin of my teeth because they were picking up on some of my lack of certainty on some of these questions. But I got licensed, ended up moving to Arizona, got a job there, and as I said earlier, kept auditing other beliefs. And finally, it was about 2009, 2010. I don't even remember necessarily how or when it happened, but at some point I got to a point where I realized, okay, I've lived with this tension long enough. I've been auditing these other beliefs. It's time that I go back and visit this one. And for me, really, it was a pursuit of integrity. If I was going to say that I believe a thing, then I darn well better like know what I believe and why, be able to back it up. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, when they make this shift towards becoming affirming in their theology, a lot of it is catalyzed by someone in their life that comes out as gay and forces them to confront their own beliefs, or they themselves are finally starting to, like we said earlier with the prodigal son, they come home to themselves like, wait a minute, I can't deny this any longer. So now I got to figure out how to align my head and my heart. But at the time, I didn't really know. I didn't have any relationships with gay people. I wasn't out there trying to figure out how can I still love my cousin Billy, right? It was just, man, I got to figure this out to mm-hmm. pursue, to be a man of integrity. I got to figure this out. And so I set about to study what I learned used to be called, or sometimes called, the clobber passages. Mm-hmm. And these are the 6 verses in the Bible that historically have been misused to justify discrimination against those who identify as LGBTQ. And what's fun about this for me, guys, is that I used all of my evangelical training. They taught me well how to exegete a passage, how to put it in its historical and cultural context, how to situate it within the larger narrative of the Bible. Like, I'm using all of these evangelical tools to really dive into these 6 verses. And out of the course of that study, where I landed was, wow, we have gotten these verses wrong. We have, as a result of poor translations, as a result of ignoring context, as a result of cultural bias, all of these things. The Bible does not say what we have always thought or been told that it says. And so my head, I didn't know, by the way, when my head and heart were out of alignment, I didn't know going into my study which one was going to like bring the other one along. I'm like, mm-hmm. maybe I'll come out in my theology, what I've always thought is right, and I just got to figure out how to force my heart into it. Or maybe, and this is how it turned out, the theology of my gut is the one that actually is going to be the one that invites my head to reconsider. And that's what happened. So wow. Changed my theology, became what we now call an affirming Christian. Again, kept it to myself because the context I was in wasn't a place where I could openly talk about that. But then fast forward a year, September 2011, Obama repeals Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the military ban against open gays and lesbians serving. And I put on my Facebook a link to an article that announced it with 6 words. I said, I'm glad this day finally came. For me, I thought I was just saying, hey, this discriminatory practice is over. Isn't that great? But really what I didn't realize I was doing is I was kind of dog whistling to my conservative evangelical church. Hey, I don't believe the same thing as y'all anymore. So, and they sniffed it out right away. And they're like, oh, Colby's now part of the gay agenda.
Oh,
which I'm still waiting for my copy of, Mark. I don't know if you can look into that.
I will make sure you get a copy of that because, you know, you can only get it from
one of us a member of the tribe, but you have to protect it once you get it, right? You understand?
Okay. I just feel like I've been out here allying for you for a dozen years, and I still haven't seen you.
I think it's about time.
I want to make sure I do this right.
I have to consult with a couple of folks, but I'll put in a good word for you. How about that?
Thanks. One of the agenda items is brunch.
Of course, brunch.
And ends with that. They're like hobbits. They have second brunch. Anyway, so that event led to me getting fired 5 days later after this Facebook post.
That was quick.
My church. It was real quick. The board meeting was called, brought me in Inquisition style, and made me sort of answer for myself for the questions of the Bible and sexuality and same-sex marriage. And that was when I came out of the theological closet and said, yeah, I don't think the Bible or God is against gay people, and I would be all in favor of same-sex marriage. And they said, hey, how about you not come in on Sunday? We'll fill your spot for you. And then Tuesday morning, they handed me my letter of termination effective immediately.
Wow.
And for any of our listeners who want to, I recommend reading the book, because it really, you're giving like the Cliff's Notes version of it, but it really plays out like a courtroom drama in the book. It's kind of gripping. So
right.
So I recommend that for somebody to see like step by step the kind of the politics that goes on behind the pulpit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as you're summarily dismissed from that. That's incredible. Okay, so Colby, I just love the fact that, having you, I can't even call you an ally. It's more than that. You're just showing who you are, being one with us as a fellow children of our source of God, and you reconcile to that, and you just put yourself out there. And in fact, even more so that you said you didn't have your cousin Billy or anything else. You just simply you felt tension between your head and heart, and you had to reconcile. And so that's what's brought us to us. So with that, though, we have ran out of time of this episode, and we have got so much more to talk with you. So Colby Martin, guys, check him out. His website is Colby Martin, MrColbyMartin.com.
Nope. I'm only going to correct you so that it's right.
Okay,
ColbyMartinOnline.com.
Thank you. Okay, so you can clean that up for me, will you, Marvin? Thank you.
Yeah.
So
no, keep it, Marvin. Keep it. I want the rest of the show.
That's right.
Stuff. I love it. He's working on his.
I thought you were going to give my Gmail address.
Enneagram 3 here. So ColbyMartinOnline.com, where you can find Unclobber. And in our next episode, Colby's going to be coming back, and we're going to talk about his other book that he did. It's an audio book called
The Shift.
There you are, The Shift. And we're going to talk about his digital pastor work he does. Also your spiritual coach. You have so much going on. So folks, thank you very much for listening to this episode. We will get to you and finish up this conversation with Colby and look forward to part 2 of this. Thank you for your time, Colby.
Thanks, Colby.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, co-hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. All rights reserved. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and other popular podcast platforms. Go to RadicalLoveLive.com to learn more about us, watch recordings of our live events, and listen to our podcast. We also invite you to check out what Kelly and Mark are doing by going to our websites. Find Kelly at kellywilson.com and Mark at markdilcom.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.